We don't just look at autoimmune disease as something to be treated, but potentially something to be prevented. The vision really is prevent you on going on to insulin for the rest of your life.
This is a platform approach that would work for other autoimmune diseases.
Onyx Live is proudly sponsored by Humphrey's Law and Panacea.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having us. It's always great to see the Onyx team. Thank you for covering the event. Seen you guys being really active. So my name is Nara Daubeney. I'm the CEO of Phaim Pharma.
My name is Professor Piers Daubeney. I am the Vice Chair of Phaim Pharma, and it's a pleasure to talk to Onyx today.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. So can you talk about exactly what Phaim are working on and how it's benefiting patients?
Wonderful. So Phaim essentially spelled P-H-A-I-M, and I always say to people the most important piece of that is the AIM piece in Phaim, which stands for antigenic immune modulation. Obviously it doesn't quite trip off the tongue, so we've shortened it to AIM, and really it's looking at AIM therapies in autoimmune disease. The novel piece around that is we don't just look at autoimmune disease as something to be treated, but potentially something to be prevented. So AIM therapies essentially halt the autoimmune process. It makes it incredibly exciting because not only can we use it for prevention, we can use it for treatment, and it also, using AIM therapies, opens the window for other adjacent synergistic on-the-market therapies to work, such as, for example, islet transplantation and type 1 diabetes.
One of the headline ambitions, I understand, is to develop effectively a vaccine for type 1 diabetes. How exactly does that work?
That's a really good question, and you've really touched on one of the most important aspects of the therapy, which is to say that we're using your own immune system to reset the desirable state of immunity. So taking it back, really, autoimmune diseases have got a universal cause. It is all because your body erroneously, through some genetic predisposition, attacks itself. And that stays true regardless of which autoimmune disease we're talking about. So for example, in type 1 diabetes, that target ends up being your pancreas. And your pancreas makes insulin, and so once your body attacks it, it kills all these cells and you end up with an absolute insulin deficiency. So keeping on that track and using type 1 diabetes as an example, AIM therapies essentially, once given to you, train you to develop your, if I put it this way, good guy cells, the desirable immune response. They're called T regulatory cells, and these essentially dampen down the erroneous immune response and give you back your natural, what's called tolerance. That is to say, your body's ability to stop attacking itself and to tolerate its tissues. We do that essentially by encouraging you to produce these cells. So you're quite right, a lot of the similarities between vaccine therapies exist. However, the difference is, of course, is vaccines, normally against infectious diseases, are asking you to develop a attacking process against something that's attacking you from the outside. And we're doing almost the flip side of that. We are actually making you make good guy cells so you can stop attacking your own good cells, essentially. So we do draw the distinction and call it an AIM therapy as opposed to more a vaccination type approach.
Now, I understand you're currently at the preclinical stage, so what's the timeline towards initiating clinical trials?
So no, you're quite right. The exciting piece around next stages of clinical development is looking to take your drug into a human trial. We have a fantastic data set in our preclinical murine, that is to say mouse and rat models, and these have essentially shown that not only are we able to prevent type 1 diabetes in these models, but actually we get the desired, these good guy cell responses I was telling you about, these T regulatory cell responses, certainly in our mouse models, which is very exciting. As with everything, of course, the proof of the pudding is, can you reproduce this in a human trial, which we're looking to start this year. We're incredibly excited about that, and we will be recruiting newly diagnosed type 1 diabetics. You at that point enter into this phase called a honeymoon period. It's quite a misnomer, really, because it's quite a rough time if you've just been diagnosed and you know full well you've got anything between 6 to 18 months before you need insulin for the rest of your life. And we really are taking that incredibly difficult pinch point in people's lives and say, actually, there's an alternative here. Taking our medicine and our medication will mean that we arrest the autoimmune response, and potentially the vision really is prevent you on going on to insulin for the rest of your life.
When it comes to clinical trials focused around autoimmune disease, they're often noted to be quite long with quite noisy endpoints. So how are you planning to approach and overcome these obstacles?
That's a really, really good question. And essentially your success is defined as meeting your primary endpoints in a clinical trial. So you're quite right to say you've got to be incredibly clear and well defined as to what those are. Luckily for a type 1 diabetic type of research program, those are very, very well defined already. The American Diabetes Association, as well as all the diabetes studies, have essentially picked out a handful of time points and endpoints that map very well to disease prevention and disease progression. And some of these will be things like insulin usage, very often mixed oral tolerance tests, which are very well established. If I say old, by which I mean well-trodden and reliable test results. So that is our approach, is to look at very clear primary endpoints, as well as some secondary ones, not least looking at T-cell responses that will be very clearly able to show not just clinical data, but humoral, that is to say what's going in your blood, as well as cellular data, that is to say T-cell data. And taking the combination of all those three is incredibly powerful in telling that story that your AIM therapy does indeed work and does what you think it does.
And where are you hoping to operate? Have you had any talks with the FDA?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good point. So obviously, wherever you are, North America tends to be your biggest market. You know, getting FDA regulatory approval is essential, as is the MHRA, who've done, you know, great strides under Lawrence's and the new chief exec leadership in getting a much faster turnaround time to get you the result and that sort of symbiotic co-development relationship that's needed. We're actually starting our trial in Australia. Reasons for that are numerous, not least that although it's a large geographical area, all these patients will filter to a small number of sites, and that means that your recruitment is, when I say easy, I mean it's a very straightforward piece in a very homogeneous patient population.
How has JPM gone so far? Who have you been speaking to and what are you getting out of it?
So it's always a fascinating experience coming to this, which is the preeminent biotech conference in the world. It's fascinating to see the presentations from the big pharma companies. What's in their pipeline, who's doing what, and as a clinician, where will we be in 5 to 10 years when these drugs start to come through? That is our biggest interaction, really, is with those companies. But also it's interesting to learn of the regulatory environment that we're working in and in other jurisdictions.
And what would you say the general sentiment is in the industry right now compared to, say, this time last year?
I think it's more optimistic. I think that the general consensus is that interest rates are falling and therefore there's more money to invest. And therefore the VCs get more investment, therefore they spend more money on biotech. And I think there's a more optimistic feel than there was last year.
You guys are operating out of the UK, here today in the US, planning to start trials in Australia. How do you compare the biotech landscapes in each of those nations?
The biotech landscape and development of both clinical assets and diagnostics, etc., is a lifeblood to a lot of developed economies. So environments that encourage that and both at governmental level, not-for-profit, charitable funding, etc., is absolutely essential. So you see that landscape does change. Obviously, there were some NIH changes in the US recently. Innovate UK as well has had some of its funding resources reduced. So I think the take-home message for companies that are international, and but companies like us who've got a huge loyalty to the UK, you know, we're UK born and bred as a grassroots biotech. You know, for us it's about being agile, being open, being transportable, to some degree being transplantable, and looking at the whole world as your oyster. We feel incredibly strongly that we do want that value chain to actually flow back into the UK, and at the same time appreciate that there are some unique offerings from different parts of the world. So it's trying to leverage all of those to actually accelerate clinical development for the benefit of patients, essentially, which is what we're here for.
And so assuming that things go well with type 1 diabetes, Where do you go next?
Well, this is a platform approach that would work for other autoimmune diseases where there is dysfunction of the T regulatory cells. Our next target, which we are starting to work up, is psoriasis, after which we will go to multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid, and work our way through the other diseases. That there is a commonality in our approach that would work for other diseases.
So in a couple of sentences, what would you say is your main message for investors this week?
Take risks. I think that would be the main message, and I think the US is fantastically good at doing that. Has the appetite, has the bandwidth, has the size, depth, and breadth of pockets to do it. And actually, JPM is a fantastic weather vane for where the industry is heading, and we've definitely seen a bit more of that this week than previous years, certainly last year. And where the US goes, the UK very happily, to some degree, certainly in their risk-taking, will follow. So really looking forward to that, and it was fantastic to see the UK delegation out here as well.
Looking forward to it too. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you, Onyx. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.